Hi, in this video, I'm going to show you my top tips on building a release strategy for your music. So tip 1, build the strategy around the art, not the other way around. So this is quite a core principle that I believe in and that I execute on when I work with clients, work with artists on building their release strategies. And the principle here is that you fit the strategy around the art. And what I mean by the art is the music, the story, any of your visual output. Build the strategy around that and not the other way around. So the other way around might be you just kind of like breaking your art, breaking up your music into different pieces just to fit a strategy that you've already decided on, that you might have modeled from a record label or you modeled from something else. The principle here is that you have the art, you have the story, and you have your target audience. The strategy should be built based on those things second. So you've got the art, you've got the album, you've got your videos, you've got your brand, you've got your story, and you should make the strategy fit that and not the other way around. Another example of this principle is you might have like a big body of work, you might have an album, and that album, kind of tells a story. Like there's a thread through the album, and the album is a product in itself. It's something that people should consume as one piece of art. And what would go against this kind of principle would be to only release it as singles so that you can send it off to playlists every time that you release a single. Because when it's on the playlist, like no one's enjoying the album, no one's enjoying the story as a whole piece of work. If you've got a piece of work like that and it's a story, and it's supposed to be an album, then it wouldn't be right to break it down into singles just to pitch it to playlists every single month or whenever you release those singles. So that's kind of an example of where you're going against this kind of principle that I believe in and that I execute on with my clients. The next tip is to tell your story. Okay, so this is really important because when you have a story, you have the opportunity to connect with an audience. Because when you have a story, you have a means of connecting with your audience and making a real impression on them. Because if you think about it, many of your favorite artists, many of your favorite even producers or bands, songwriters, you know their story. You've consumed their story, whether it's through their Wikipedia pages or pieces of press about them and about what they're doing, or even stories that they've told to you directly on their social media or on their email newsletters. You've internalized their story, their narrative, and that has a huge impact on how you feel about them, like how you consume their art, their music, and what your relationship with them is like. That has a lasting impression on you, their story, okay? The third tip is to use a call to action. Okay, so let's say that you've come up with a story and you're now posting that story on Instagram, or you might be pitching that story out, or you might be telling that story through a music video, what have you. Whatever that content output is, it must have a call to action. So the call to action is like, so you give them the stories like, oh, this album is about this. It comes from this place. The reason I wrote it is because of this, and my family this, or my life that, or these things that happened to me. You tell the story, and as you're telling the story, you are inherently promoting yourself, you're promoting your story, you're promoting your work. And then at the end of the story, so let's say, for example, that maybe it's an Instagram post, you've got a photo that kind of tells the story there, and in the caption, you've lent in on the story a little bit more with some text. And then at the end of that, you have a call to action that is debut album coming out 8th of December, pre-order now, link in bio. Okay, so after you've kind of provided that value, after you've provided that story, they've consumed that story, you're telling them what to do next, which is great because you garnered their attention. You kind of kept their attention with your storytelling. You've kind of hooked them in, really. And now you're telling them, great, pre-order my album. It's coming out on this date. And then they go to your bio, they go to the link, they subscribe to your email list or whatever it is. Okay, so using a call to action basically means you're telling them what to do after you've garnered attention and that you've told some story. Okay, my fourth tip is focus on real connections. So what I mean by this is like when you're thinking about your audience, like literally think about them. Think about who they are on an individual level. Okay, so what I mean by that is like you might have 10 to 20 people who already support you. Think about them. Think about them by name. Think about their lives or what have you. This is your core fan base, the ones that support you the most and frankly probably deserve most of your attention because they're the ones who are going to promote you. They're the ones who are going to tell their friends about you. Okay, so if you focus on real connections and you really focus on them on an individual level as opposed to kind of like an abstract level of like, oh, my ideal audience looks like this or this, you're actually focusing on them as individuals and you are talking to them directly about what's going up and you're even inviting them to be a part of the process. An example of this might be you might reach out to one of your core kind of supporters. At first, this might be like a friend or a member of your family. That's absolutely fine. You know, they're the ones who you already have relationships with. So it makes sense to focus on them to some extent because those are the people who are probably going to share your content out when you post it on social media. So focusing on them and inviting them to be a part of the journey, invite them to be a part of the campaign. You might send them a message saying, hey, hope you're well. As you might know, I've got some really cool stuff coming out. I'm working on my album and I'd love to keep you updated. So would you mind if I added your email to my email list? You know, and then give them the opportunity to say yes. And then they're part of it, right? And then you can email them, you can DM them, you can, you know, focus on that connection. So this is actually a similar principle, one fan at a time. So again, it kind of comes back to the focus on real connections. And when you go in with this one fan at a time kind of principle, you again focus on them on an individual level and you're updating them on an individual level because the long tail of this is that you have people who are going to continue supporting you forever beyond just this release. You're going to have people who are always going to be there because you've kind of like connected with them on an individual level. You provided value to them on an individual level and you're going to continue connecting with them. You're going to focus on them one fan at a time. And for example, when a new person comments on your story or comments on your post or whatever it is, then you can dive into them and say, hey, I'd love to, you know, gift you a free MP3 or maybe even a free piece of merch or whatever, just to build more value in them as a fan. And then again, that's the difference between someone just following you on Instagram and someone being a real fan forever. And real fans, they become the people who buy your merch, who subscribe to your VIP club, who buy your CDs or buy your digital albums, or even share your content on social media. Okay, so my sixth tip is to build a funnel. Okay, so the funnel is a popular concept in sales and marketing. And the principle is that there are basically different levels of fandom or different levels of followers when it comes to you, your brand, your product, whatever it is, your music. The concept of the funnel is that like there are different levels. And the top level is what I call the brand awareness level or the follower level, if you like. And that's basically like social media or YouTube or maybe even Spotify or whatever. That's the level at which people become aware of you, whether it's through running an ad or any organic content output that you do. That's the top layer, okay? And that's the layer that's probably going to have the biggest numbers, but it's not necessarily the layer of the most value, especially the most value per person, okay? So a second layer of the funnel, so the layer of the funnel beneath the top layer, the brand awareness layer, might be your email list, okay? Or your Patreon, or whatever you use to connect with a smaller portion of your audience who have opted into hearing more about you and getting more content delivered directly to them. Okay, so if it's an email list, maybe let's say you've got 1,000 followers on Instagram and 5% of them subscribe to your email list, then they've given you permission. They've kind of gone into the consideration stage and have given their email to you so that you have the opportunity to promote your releases to them, promote your products to them, promote your merchandise to them. So when they get into the second layer of the funnel, they're definitely in that kind of consideration phase as opposed to the following phase. When someone follows you on social media, they're just kind of considering you really. They're not really fans, or they're not necessarily all fans rather. But when they go into the next layer of the funnel, they give you an email address or they subscribe to your Patreon, then they are heavily considering buying something from you in the future, and it gives you the opportunity to make more impressions on them, to provide more value to them, to entertain them more, to tell your story to them on an ongoing basis and deepen that connection. When you've got an email address especially, If you use something like MailChimp or some other email marketing software, you can really drill down to your audience on an individual level, as opposed to kind of like an abstract or demographic level. You'll know who your fans are by name, okay, and by email address, and you'll know who's clicking on your emails, who's opening them, and all sorts of other good things that allow you to really deepen the connection with your fan base. The lowest layer of the funnel is generally where you make the money, or where the business value of the funnel is. And that's when you promote your releases and they buy the products. When someone buys a product, whether it's a piece of merchandise or your album or what have you, that's like the third or the lowest layer of the funnel. And again, those are the ones that you're feeding the top of the funnel for. So you feed the top of the funnel, and that feeds the bottom layers of the funnel as well. And then that just equates into, more products sold and what have you. And when you have that, you basically have a business. You have a business model, you have a business plan, and what you do at the top layer trickles down into the bottom layer and equals dollars in the bank. Okay, so that's what building a funnel is all about, really. And you should build a funnel. You should at least design your funnel for the sake of your releases. Okay, and the next tip is don't go for fame. What I mean by this is don't only focus on the top layer of the funnel, basically. If your primary goal is to get as many streams on Spotify as possible, then that's going to push you in the direction of playlists, and that's going to push you in the direction of things that won't necessarily impact your business, won't necessarily equate to real fans, okay? Because you might get some playlists and that's great, and then you get a few thousand streams for a month whilst you're still on those playlists, and then you go back to normal, and you never know who listened to your music, not on an individual level. And it doesn't necessarily contribute to the funnel. It doesn't necessarily contribute to your business. We all know that streams don't pay well, but you don't even know the second someone streamed your music on a playlist, they might not hear your music again, or they might hear it a couple of more times. And their relationship is only really with the playlist and only really with Spotify. It's not really your audience. So again, if you go for fame, if you only go for the top layer numbers and just streams and just views and what have you, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunity in terms of building an actual business or releasing your music as a proxy to building your career as an artist. Okay, so when you get out of the mindset of going for the biggest numbers or going for the most streams and all of these things just to make you feel famous for a minute, you're distracting yourself from actually building a real fan base, and as a proxy to that, a real business, a real sustainable business as an artist. Okay, so these are my top tips. These are my principles when I help artists build out their release strategies and release campaigns, especially when you're releasing music as a proxy to a career, to building a business as an independent music artist. Hope that was useful, and I'll see you in the next video.